We're in Hingham, Massachusetts, Fort Hill Street, site of the old Naval Ammunition Depot, or magazine, opened in 1909 as a magazine. Magazine is actually a building or a storage of munitions, naval ships and naval guns. Most of the munitions were taken off the ships out in Boston Harbor before the ship went into the Boston Navy Yard to be repaired, or Portsmouth Navy Yard to be repaired. They'd have to pull off the munitions and bring it into here. Then from there, what they would do is they would go through it, make sure if it was still serviceable or not. They would just store it in a magazine, which is a big building on site. And when the ship was repaired, they would go through and they would have a special order come from the ship's captain saying, "This is what I need," and they would fill the order depending on the ship and what they needed from munitions, and then it would be off to war. The depot right here, main site it was called, was started in 1909 as a munitions base. Went through World War I. World War II came about. They needed more space, so they annexed the what's now called Wampatuck State Park, which was called the Annex, when they needed more space, more room to move around and storage and everything else for World War II. So this was first, Wampatuck came second. At one point they did manufacture ammunition here, the 5-inch 38s, which is a 5-inch in diameter shell for anti-aircraft and surface vessels. They did manufacture those. A lot of the stuff they did take off the ships and rework it. They would pull it apart if it was old and corroded, and they would put it through an acid bath, clean up the shells, and reload them using the same material. And they did manufacture here what they called a VT fuse, which is a vacuum tube. It was a top secret for World War II. What it was a proximity fuse that they would screw into the head of a 5-inch 38, and they would use it for anti-aircraft. And what it was it would blow up when it came within close proximity of the aircraft, as opposed to just shooting it up in the air. If it hit it, it was a big advantage. If it just got close to the plane, it would blow up and probably knock the plane out, as opposed to you see on all the war movies, the shrapnel, they blow up at a certain altitude and hope they're going to get close. Well, this one here was head and shoulders above that. So it was very top secret. They would only let the Navy use it. They didn't want any land-based units use those, because if it fell into enemy hands, it would have been a big loss. That's a picture over here at the park with them manufacturing the VT fuse, and supposedly a lot of the work was done on that right here in Hingham. And like I say, that just screws into the head of the projectile. I guess it was trying to figure out how to get the projectile to fire without blowing up, as it's leaving the gun. It was a big problem. So I guess they finally obviously figured that out. But it was vacuum tubes, like in the old radios and TVs that back in the 40s had the tubes inside, so pretty fragile. So if you're firing that out of a gun, it was kind of. But they got it to work. If they just came close to a plane, if they got within a close proximity of the plane, they would blow up. And they also had a safety fuse on them too. If they didn't come close to a plane at all, and then as it was falling down, it would blow up when it got to a certain altitude. Sort of like the first smart bomb in that respect. If it got within a few feet or real close to a plane, it didn't have to hit the plane. It just got real close, and it would explode. I really don't know if they actually, I don't know what the extent of the whole thing was. I'm sure it was used against the kamikazes in the Pacific. It would have been definitely a lot better. If you figure the size of a 5-inch shell is only 5 inches in diameter, I mean, to hit a moving plane, it's going to be a lot harder to hit a moving plane than if something blows up close to it and sends shrapnel everywhere and it's going to hit something. Yeah, my dad was stationed here in 1944 after coming back from the Pacific. He was one of the Marine Guards stationed here at the base and did the patrolling around and kept the security of the base intact. If you come over and see the maps, you can see there was a large area. It was probably close to 1,000 acres at the time. There were a lot of roads, railroad tracks, and we actually owned on the other side of the river too. Great Esca side of the river was owned by the Navy as a buffer zone. So my dad was, he was stationed here in 1944, and actually his enlistment was up. He signed up in 1940, so his 4-year enlistment was up in 1944, but he re-enlisted right here at the Hingham Naval Ammunition Depot for another 4 years, stayed here for a while before moving on, and then came back here at the end of his tour to live. He did meet a girl in Hingham, turned out to be my mother, and she was a Hinghamite, longtime Hinghamite. Her father worked in here also as a mason, and once the base was built up, he stayed on and worked at a number of the different filling houses where they filled the shells with the ammunition or powder before they were sent and loaded. So he worked at the filling house. He was also a chef. He worked at the mess hall and a number of other things. So he was a Marine in World War I, and then lived here and settled here in Hingham. When World War II broke out, he said he had to do his part for that and signed up on the ammunition depot, which a lot of the people in Hingham, actually, it was a great opportunity for them to make a good day's pay to the Depression and everything else. And there was a lot of building going on in here, and then once the building was done, they needed people to come in and actually do the loading. And I think at the top of World War II, there were 2,400 civilian people working here. They started acquiring the land about 1904 from the different people that owned property on site. There were close to 100 people that owned different plots of land in here. A lot of the Hingham names, the Herseys, the Lincolns, a lot of the people owned property along the river, and they had hunting camps, fishing camps, and all that. And the Navy came in and said, we're going to take your land. And they gave them what they thought was a fair price at the time. It was probably about $50 or something like that, $100 an acre or something, I'm not sure. And so some of the different parcels of land here were pretty good size along the river. And they had some hunting shacks. They would hunt ducks and fish, and the herring would go right up the river here into the Weymouth Whitman's Pond. So before the Navy took it over, there was a pretty good fishing and farming and hunting area along the river. Then once the Navy took over, that kind of came to a halt. I guess it was good for the wildlife. Actually, it was good for the park. If the war didn't come about, there would be no park. It would be all houses over here. Before we got into the war, there was the Lend-Lease program, and the shipyard was actually building ships for the British Navy before they started building ships for us. They would build the ships, and just before they finished the ships, a couple of weeks before they finished the ships, the British crew would come over and start working on the ship and getting it ship shape and everything else. So they were in the town of Hingham probably a month or so before they went off to war also. Because they did all the normal stuff that everyone does, go to the USO Club, which was down in the Hingham Square at Talbot's, and a few other places in town, and they met a lot of Hingham girls too, and there's quite a few people in town that have British roots also. There's quite a few Navy and British Navy and U.S. Navy, Marines, everybody else, quite a few of them tied the knot here. It went the generations kept going that way, I'll tell you. In 1962, the Navy deemed the Hingham Naval Ammunition Depot a surplus. It wasn't really needed anymore. The majority of weapons were getting away from the big guns, going more to aircraft. It was basically a surplus. So it went into mothballs for about 10 years. And then in 1972, they decided they weren't going to use it. So they turned parts of it over to the town. The biggest majority, 400 and some odd acres, was given to the town to be used as a wildlife refuge, a park. A lot of nonprofit organizations got buildings given to them with the stipulation that it be used for like 10 years before they could do anything with it. So we had Project Turnabout, the New England Wildlife Center, that was another one. The Hingham Fire Museum, Bear Cove Fire Museum, Social Model Railroad Club, they all got their buildings basically given to them with the stipulation that they not do anything with them for 10 years. That's why you see a lot of the construction going on out here at the New River Townhomes, Carlson Field, a lot of the places after I guess it was 20 years actually, 72, maybe 30 years, 2002, that they could actually sell the property and make a profit or whatever. Up till that date, they basically could not sell it without paying a penalty. So 1962 was the year that this place shut down. I have newspaper articles on that. We have pictures of a gentleman surveying a whole warehouse full of 16-inch projectiles, getting ready to close the base down. So it was basically closed down. All the buildings are still here. They did keep a presence. The guards, there were a few guards that would go around and keep the population, the civilian people out, like I say, until 1972 when they turned it over. Well, they did, the reservists did come in and train here. Every once in a while they do like maneuvers and stuff out here, and they can still find a few of the blank M14 shells from that era that would have been in the World War II side of it. But there's still quite a few artifacts to be found, along the river's edge. You can find, bottles, different bottles, old milk bottles, soda bottles from that era, back into the 40s and earlier. So it's about, I'd say 2009, we were going to do a ceremony out in front of the building with some of the old workers that worked at the depot. And we were going to give them a tour. And so we started out in front of the building, and a week or so before that program was going to get about, I came into the building, and it was in disarray. It was loaded with a lot of material from the Hingham Rec department had canoes in here, and they had run a program out of here years before that had been basically defunct. And so there was a lot of stuff left over from them, refrigerators, like I say, canoes, a rack for the canoes, rope gear, and everything. And the building still had some of the old radiators attached to the wall. We needed a place to come if it was going to be an inclement day. So I kind of cleaned out one end of the building and kind of saw a little bit of potential in the building. So after that ceremony, I got busy and kind of cleaned it out a little more, and took the radiators off the wall and patched it all up and painted it and got the outside painted up nice. And we started with a few items of memorabilia that were found over the years by other rangers that were here. Anytime they found something in the grass or in the woods or whatever, they would put it in Building 80, which is a building where we store all of our equipment for the park. And it's an old magazine from World War II, probably goes back to the 30s. So that's where we keep our mowers, the truck, and the lawn equipment, and a lot of the park stuff, tools and stuff. Over the years, people had found things that came from the depot, and we needed a place to display them. So I got this all cleaned up, and another gentleman from Hopkinton, Jim Rose, whose father also worked here in World War II, had a few items. I had some items from my father, and paperwork, discharge papers, re-enlistment papers, Liberty Pass, stuff like that. So we have badges, we have some old flare guns, lots of bullet shells and projectiles, and a lot of pictures. Now, there's another gentleman from Weymouth who goes into Boston Navy Yard, and where they have hundreds and hundreds of pictures from the base. And he's got copies of hundreds of pictures. So we opened it up to for a few months during the summer, and we got a few donations. People come in and they would donate, and I would buy picture frames and mount some of the pictures in there, and it just kind of took off. And we had a couple more ceremonies here, and people came in and saw it, and people that actually worked here, they started donating some of the stuff that they had, so it kind of really took off. The YF-415 was what they called a lighter. It's the name given to a ship or a barge that transports munitions from ship to shore and back again. So what the lighter would do is it would go out, it had a crane on it, and they would pick up the ammunition from the ship that was out in the harbor before it went to the Navy Yard. They would pick up the ammunition and store it on the deck and bring it into the base, and then they would, from the lighter, they would then bring it and put it onto the dock, and then from the dock, it would get loaded into a boxcar. Railroad tracks ran throughout the base to every magazine. So they would load it on the boxcar, and from there they would figure out where it was gonna go. Every building had its, a number, and the inside was all marked out so that they could find anything they wanted. They would go to a building, and then they would go inside the building. It was all marked in letter and number designations along the wall. So you could go to Building 80 at A6 and go right there and knew exactly what they were gonna pick up or drop off. You would transport munitions from the ship to the shore and back again. And also, the YF-415 happened to be on a mission. It was dumping obsolete ammunition from the base out in a big trench out off of Boston. I guess it was some sort of rockets it was dumping, and it had some sort of igniters, matches they call them, caught on fire and caught the ship on fire, and eventually caught the munitions on fire and blew up out in Boston Harbor and sank. Killed 17 sailors from Hingham, the Hingham base, and some of them from the Boston Navy Yard. But yeah, that was a sad day. So we have a stone outside the dockhouse here dedicated to the sailors that lost their lives on the YF-415. And it was donated by J.B. Mills, who was actually a sailor who was supposed to go out on that ship that day, but the CO of the base had another job for him. He missed that ship, so he lost a lot of his mates that day on the ship. So he went out and purchased a stone, and we had a ceremony out here last year, and a few of the people came that had relatives that passed away, that died on that ship. We have information on that here too. J.B. Mills, who was the sailor on the base in 1943, I believe, he was here when the YF-415 sank, told us a few stories about the base. They used to play football, baseball, they had teams. Every base had their own team. And he said that John F. Kennedy, President John F. Kennedy, when he was an ensign in the Navy, was actually stationed here for, I believe it was around 6 weeks, to go through a munitions handling course. And he actually played football out here at Lynch Field with JFK on the opposing side. So that was kind of interesting. We got to do a little more research and find out from the Navy if he was in fact stationed here, but we have it under good pretenses that he was stationed here for about 6 weeks. I have newspaper articles on he's not actually in them, but newspaper articles on that course that quite a few sailors did go through that course with the munitions and the handling of the munitions aboard ship. Butch and Bismarck. Bismarck was a Marine mascot dog in World War I, and Butch was a mascot dog during World War II. And they're actually buried on base up by where the DPW building is now. The graves are there. A few years ago, I believe it was back about 4 years, 1909 again, 2009, excuse me, that the VFW, the American Legion, and the Marine Corps League donated monies to purchase new stones because they had fallen in disrepair. So they do have a nice grave site up there now with their names of the dogs and a Marine Corps mascot emblem up there. So that can be seen if you go up to the, right across from Carlson Field. There's actually a staircase that goes up to went up to the old Marine barracks up that top of that hill. And they were buried with all the honors given to a regular enlisted man at the time. And there's newspaper articles from back in the 40s when Butch passed away of them marching up the hill in full dress blues, giving him a final farewell. This is all basically from when it was a military base, basically. Some of the stuff is pre-base. There's some old bottles and stuff and stove parts that were found, in the woods. that were pre the Navy. Yeah, Building 80 is over on the, by the Conservatory of Music side of the park. Now, the Conservatory of Music was actually Quarters A, which was the commander of the base, the Navy commander of the base. That was his home while he was stationed here. So not a bad place to live. It was a big building back then. And there was also right across from the conservatory, there's a pathway lined by cedar trees that went down to a tennis court. Probably wasn't a bad duty to be here, except for in the winter it was kind of cold. The Lost Bunker. There's a few legends on lost bunkers around here. There is a legend of a bunker that was buried in the ground. I don't know if this is what you're talking about or not, but it was called Bunker Alley because there were actually 5 bunkers down there that were buried in the side of the hill. And a few years ago, we had an incident down there with some homeless people, and since then, the state, that actually was owned by the state. It's not part of Bear Cove Park. So they had an incident down there, and they came in and they demolished these 5 bunkers that were buried in the side of the hill. They demolished them, ground them up, and covered them over. And so that's about the bunkers, but that's why it's called Bunker Alley anyway. You can see on the maps in here that what the building numbers they were and what they housed. They were just called magazines again, where they stored some sort of munitions or components of munitions. This place had enough munitions to blow. It was said, I worked for the fire department also, and the chief told me back then, he said the fire chief from the Navy base said, if you get a call to come here, he said, wait a day, then come in and just pick up what's left, because the place is going to be gone. There was just so much powder in here and dynamite and everything else that it would have been blown off the map. Hingham would have been gone if it ever went up. So thank God it didn't, and we're still here. Wampatuck had nuclear-tipped warheads over there for their AMRAAM missiles, and we have pictures of those up on the wall. It's supposedly, I heard there were parts of the atom bomb that were stored here at times. I can't confirm that at all, but a number of people have told me that there were parts of the atom bomb stored either at Wampatuck or here on their way to the Pacific. But there were atomic weapons at Wampatuck. When they had to move the munitions from place to place, the railroad tracks went to every building, every magazine, to the docks, throughout the whole base. There were railroad tracks that came in on Fort Hill Street. There was an actual station right at where the West Hingham station is now. There's a Thomas Auto Body. There was actually a railroad station right there. They would actually drop the Navy guys off, and the Marines, could ride the train right into Boston, and also move munitions from here to the shipyard. When the ships got ready to leave over there, they would load the ships up in the shipyard before they left to go to war. So there were a lot of trains. We have pictures of all the locomotives that were actually in here. Some of them were, after they left here, when it closed down, they went to other places. And a cousin of mine, who was a train buff, he went to a lot of these different places to track them down. And he found a majority of them he found, and he took pictures of them where they were. And some were in Florida, some were in Pennsylvania, they were all in New Jersey. They were all around. But he has a lot of pictures from I would say the 50s, of trains in the shipyard and also in the depot there. Back in 1972, the park, which we know of now as Bear Cove Park, was donated by the federal government to the town of Hingham with stipulations that it be used for recreation. Certain sections of it were given to different people or sold off to different people, but 400 and some odd acres that was stipulated as a wildlife refuge by the federal government and given to the town for recreational and educational use. That's why we see some of the high school has buildings on the property, the Tracy's building. We had the Wildlife Center. The New England Wildlife Center was here. The Model Railroad Club has one of the old magazines that they have renovated, and it's a gorgeous building. They have an open house there twice a year where you can go in and check out their exhibits in there. It's an ongoing thing in there. They're always building new layouts and expanding their layouts. So hey, if you haven't been in there, that's a great place to be. Their Cove Fire Museum has their home in one of the old filling houses. The filling house was where they filled some of the shells to be shipped off. That was given to them, the use for the exhibition that they have down there, which is a great take also. Bear Cove Park, like I said, was given to the town in 1972 with the stipulation it be used for recreational. So we have 400 and some odd acres of land here, riverfront, a lot of walking trails, a lot of roads. We have a ton of just wildlife in here. We have deer, we have turkeys, we have osprey, we have lots and lots of different birds, blue herring, egrets, snowy egrets, anything you can pretty much think of that's common to the area. You see it a lot of times, but you know, there are people that like to come here and walk their dogs and walk their children and strollers and ride bicycles and jog. And we have a road racing here in August. I think it's the 4th annual End of Summer Classic. So we have a road race. We have usually around 500 runners or so that the proceeds goes to the park. And we actually made enough money over the last couple of years to pave the parking lot at the main entrance. We paid for that out of proceeds from that race. It also pays for some of the dog bags. We purchased dog bags so that you can pick up after your dog. We recommend that people bring their own dog bags, but we supply them if you forget. There are a lot of scenic trails along the river. There are tons of jogging paths. The place is plowed. We try and plow it in the wintertime, so you still have a place to walk away from the road. We try and keep up with the park and keep it opened up. We had a lot of tree damages last winter, with a lot of wind and tree damage. So we did lose a lot of our evergreens and our birch trees. With some help from the highway department and tree department, we got everything cleaned up. And we have people boating in here all the time. There's not supposed to be there's no water skiing or towing of any recreational jet skis or any of that stuff in here, but we have people come in here fishing. I have seen quite a few people pulling striped bass out of the river. And they fish from the shore on either side, either the Weymouth side or the Hingham side of the, on the bank, or you can come in your boat. A lot of people come in their boat. Just got to be careful if you go up beyond the pilings. You don't want to go up too far. It gets pretty shallow at low tide. It's really kind of like the rapids at low tide. You know, it's real narrow there. So they all got to come through there, and that's the place to get them. It's an ongoing thing. We try and keep the park clean, and there are multiple trails that you can take. There's maps that you can go online and get a map, or we have a few on site. We ask that if you do use a map to return it to the kiosk when you're through. And the other thing is there are great walking paths down close to what we call Indian Point. Indian Point was close to where they had Camp Hingham in 1917 through 1925, where a lot of the sailors went through here before they went to World War I. There's foundations. You can still see the remnants of brick foundations down there. You can see some of the remnants of the old pier that was there at low tide. You can still see the pilings. So that's where the pier was, where they trained some of the sailors on the different boats. The river has filled in considerably from when it was being used by the Navy, but you can still get into the dockhouse in your recreational boat. And Memorial Day and Labor Day, we have considerable amount of boats anchored out there for the weekend, and they have a grand old time. So there's plenty to do. There's places for the dogs to swim. There's places for the picnic tables for the family to come and have a picnic lunch and walk or ride bicycles, and it's really a great place.